Hi guys, this is Dice Kimura. I'm a Fort Lauderdale guitar teacher and Skype teacher. And today I want to talk to you about this topic of string gauge and how does string gauge affect your tone. This is a really good question. Is string gauge really important? Why do some people use really big strings and some people it doesn't really seem to matter to them? Guitar players obsess over tone, and if you're like any guitar player, you're obsessing over amps and pickups and pedals and all this stuff. But what you really should be paying attention to first is your string gauge, okay? Because on the strings is where all the action starts. That's where the tone begins, is from your strings. So the answer, by the way, is yes. Fat strings equal fat tone. It's that simple. I think this is actually one of the best kept secrets of tone. I don't know. Maybe it's because pedal manufacturers and amp manufacturers and guitar manufacturers and pickup manufacturers through their advertisements wants to make you believe that tone comes from their products. But the beginning of tone, the origin of tone is from your strings. If you start with a fat tone, all you're doing is working to preserve it, okay? In other words, when you have big strings, I use big strings. I use on electric guitar, I play either 11s or 12s. The 11s, what am I doing? 11 to 50s, or 12s, I think go 12 to 52s. At one point in my life, I was even playing 13s, drop tunes significantly, but 13 to 56, and that was just massive tone. And of course, I'm a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, and that was one thing I learned about Stevie Ray Vaughan's awesome tone. Not just did he have that specific strat, and not only did he use, like, 5 or 10 amps simultaneously on stage, turned all the way up, but he used massive strings. So I started experimenting with that. This is a Stevie Ray Vaughan signature strat. You can see it right there. And yeah, I used to use 12s and 13s. Today I have 11s. I use 11s in standard or 12s at a half step down. And they sound huge. When you put on big strings, you get more bass. That's one of the biggest things that you notice. But also, in order to ring the string properly, you need to hit the string harder. So it's a workout on both hands, really. You got to hit the string harder with more clarity, and also you have to hit the string. The left hand has more work to do too, with choking and bending and hammers and pulls and just grabbing chords. It's a lot more work. But in hitting the string harder, this changes the nature of your tone. This is a very important concept. So by having a greater level of attack, but the string can handle the attack. So it's not like you're over picking like you would if you were on a 9 gauge, okay, and you hit it with, let's say I use, a big pick like this. This is an 88. I'll use an 88 for 12 gauge, and I'll use a 73 for 11 gauge, because I want there to be, I like there, if you can get like kind of a cushy effect on that pick hitting the string, that gives you nice raunchy mids, So you don't want too hard of a pick. Well, at least I don't want too hard of a pick, because I play rock and roll and blues. But I don't want too soft of a pick, because then I don't have speed, I don't have clarity. So I like to be right in the middle. Something, I like the 73 Dunlops, like I said, for 11 gauge. If I go to 12 gauge, I go up to an 88. If I'm playing acoustic, I'll play either 12s or 13s, and in both scenarios I use the 73 Dunlop. So because you're hitting the strings harder, you're gonna get cleaner highs, and then because the strings are bigger, you're gonna get more lows, and then you also get more mids. You get basically more of everything. So the amp doesn't have to work as hard. It's not, when you're using big strings, and if you have a good guitar with big strings and good pickups, the amp only needs to be able to transparently communicate what you're already doing with the guitar. So the EQ that's coming out of your guitar, you just want to translate that over into the amp. You don't need to boost things, or you don't need to do a whole lot of extra work once you have a great tone that comes purely from strings. So when you understand that, it's a relief. You change the way you dial in your sound. You change the way you work your pedals. It's a lot of things. One of the analogies that I use when it comes to tone is it's like a piece of steak. Okay, if you have a really, really good steak, if you go to your favorite steakhouse and you order an excellent piece of steak, all you really need, it's either fine as is, or maybe it may need a little bit of salt, you know, and that's it. And because it was fine to begin with, a good guitar tone, all you need is a little bit of salt. Maybe all you need is a hand-wired 808 tube screamer. Just a little bit of salt. It's not a... You ever tried one of these babies? It's just a little bit. So when you already have good tone, you don't need a whole lot more, you know, of fancy smancy stuff. You already sound amazing. You know, you have a good guitar, USA made Fender, let's say, with some decent pickups. These are Texas Specials. I changed this out to a pearly gates in the bridge, though. And then you have like a good amp, like a Fender amp I'm using with a 12-inch speaker with a Celestion greenback. You turn everything, you know, up, you know, and then you let the strings ring out. From there, you're going to tweak your volume settings and stuff to let the strings sound optimized. So where do you put your settings, you may ask? Well, there's no set answer because it depends on your volume. You know, the more volume you have, the less bass you need, because bass really comes from moving air. Okay, so it's an interesting concept of how bass is affected by the string gauge. Just to give you some reference, a 56 gauge string, if you do, I used to use 13s to 56, and a 56 on the low E is like the high D, or I'm sorry, a high G of a bass. It's the highest string of a bass. So it's like the high string of a bass is on my lowest string. I don't use 13s anymore. I'm either using 11s or 12s, like I said. But it's some serious bass. And so that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is if you're using a Strat like me with a stop tailpiece, basically you're going to need all 5 springs on the back. Actually, this one I'm only using 3 because I tend to float that chunk right. But all my other Strats, here's one, 5 springs. My PRS has 5 springs. Anyway, I put 5 springs on the back. Why do I do that? Because that not only does it strengthen the pulling back on the action. The strings on this side pull up, and then the springs on the back side pull back. But it also gives you better tone. It's so simple, guys. The more metal you put on your guitar, the better it sounds. More metal meaning the strings, right? The springs in the back. And how about the frets? Depending on how big your frets are, that changes your sustain. Because think about it, these strings have vibration that has to go into the wood. So if it's a bigger string, there's more vibration, more resonance to drive into the wood. If you have a bigger fret, you have more resonance to go into the wood. More of that, if a bigger fret is more of a surface for that vibrating string to grab onto and to put the vibration into the guitar. So basically, like this guitar, I think I'm using Jim Dunlop, these are 6100s, I believe. Or I can't remember if they look like 6100s. In this guitar, I'm using 6105s. These are 6105s, and both are great. So for a long time I used 6100s, which are actually bass frets, and then recently my luthier convinced me to use 6105s. So that's a couple of ideas of string gauge and how that affects your tone. Once you get that going, then you can try to figure out how to dial in your amp and all this stuff. I got to caution you though, if you use bigger strings, you need to play with more volume in order to get the fullness of the string ringing. So if you play super low volume with big strings, you're really only going to get mids and highs out of your amp. In order for get the low end to really come out, you have to turn your amp up to at least 40% or something, depending on wattage of the amp, you know. But that's why a lot of guitar players play loud. Anyway, I hope this is helpful to you. If you like my channel, please subscribe or hit the like button, and I will see you at the next video, guys. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.